Birding is one of my favorite things. It really kind of takes me out of the daily grind of, sitting in front of a desk all day. And now I'm just in the woods and all I have to do is, find this bird. I kind of think of it as a game of Pokemon Go, which might sound weird, but it's like Pokemon Go in real life. You go into the woods and all you have to do is find a bird. Don't try to catch them all though. They are wild animals. I had friends who would talk about birding. I was like, okay, that's weird, but you do you. And I was running in Central Park and this great egret started to kind of soar next to me. And I was like, wow, that thing is majestic. And then I realized birding is cool. I think everyone should really get into birding. I think if we all just birded, everyone would be slightly happier. So as a birder and someone who loves birding, and as a scientist, I have seen data that's been coming out saying that, birding populations are going down, migratory patterns are changing because of the changing climate. And I just kind of wanted to know, how worried should I be? Will there be birding in the future? Will the birds still be around? And in order to do that, I spoke with someone who is an expert on that subject.
The first person I talked to see how worried I should be about the birds is Jeff Walters. Jeff is a professor at Virginia Tech, and he specifically studies a type of bird that is very vulnerable to a changing environment.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeff. Just can you quickly introduce yourself and let us know for how long you've been studying birds?
My name is Jeff Walters. I'm the Bailey Professor of Biological Sciences at Virginia Tech. And I would say I began studying birds when I was an undergraduate at West Virginia University, which would have been around 1972, I think it was. I joined a lab to do that. But I've been interested in birds for longer than that. I first started keeping a bird list of birds I saw when I was in 5th grade. And I recently rediscovered that bird list, my first bird list, when I had to clean out a place where my parents had been living. And I have to say, there were some suspect sightings on there, but there were a lot of good ones too.
So you kind of always knew that you wanted to get into birds, but did you always knew that's what you wanted to do for a living?
No, I was told by my parents that that could be something, it was a hobby, but there's no way you could make a living at studying birds or studying animals in general, because I was also loved butterflies. I was just a real nature person growing up, but my life changed in my freshman year at West Virginia, where they had an introductory biology. They had different professors do a lecture, and one day a professor named Dr. Shine, Marty Shine, walked in, and he was an animal behavior person and basically studied animals for a living. And that was it for me. That one lecture, I said, I'm doing that.
Do you want to talk about what your early research was in this lab?
So it was with birds, and it was on imprinting in birds, which was a big topic in animal behavior in the early 1970s, basically how certain kinds of birds like quail and chickens and ducklings sort of imprint on their mother and know to follow their mother. And turkeys do this, where there's a lot of information about how that shapes sort of how they perceive other individuals. So I made a huge giant, what I call a super chick, an artificial thing that looked just like a chick instead of like the mother, and to see if I could imprint babies on that. It didn't work out all that well, but undergraduate research doesn't.
So since then, you've moved into quite a bit
of a different direction. So one of the things you study are different woodpecker species and kind of how they are very likely to be affected by changing climate. Can you kind of explain why they're affected maybe more than other species and how that helps you study birds in general?
Yeah, so I've studied for decades. Once I got my first faculty position at North Carolina State University, I started studying there in the early 1980s, the red-cockaded woodpecker, which is an endangered woodpecker that is endemic to the southeastern United States. And they're a specialist on longleaf pine forest. And a lot of birds are being adapting to climate change by shifting their ranges, like shifting farther north, and losing also at the same time part of their range in the south, so that conditions become unsuitable for them at the southern end, but at the northern end, conditions that were unsuitable become more suitable. But longleaf pine is a very, very long-lived tree, and everything about them is big. The needles are very long, but the cones are huge. So they don't disperse hardly any distance from the tree. And these woodpeckers need trees at least 100 years old to make cavities in, because they're the only woodpecker in the world that makes cavities in living pine trees. So basically, the longleaf pine could spread north and become suitable habitat for them at a rate of maybe 50 yards every 100 years. So you can see their problem. Their habitat that they need is not going to move north rapidly enough. So they're going to have to adapt in place.
Yeah, because they sound like they're very confined. These cones are not going to go far enough for them to be able to change. And what did you see in your research with temperatures that were getting hotter and colder in terms of survival of the offspring, in terms of how well these birds did?
So we did some studies of that, because I have two studies at the state. It's the northern end of the range, which is North Carolina. There's one small population in very southeastern corner of Virginia, but basically North Carolina is the northern end of the range, and then one in the panhandle of Florida, which is at the southwestern edge of the range. And so what we've noticed is a couple of things. In the north, they are nesting earlier. So they start nesting about 2 weeks earlier now than when I first started studying them. So they've advanced the date at which they lay eggs, and that seems to have consequences for how reproduction goes. But their productivity is better at the northern end of the range than it used to be. They lay more eggs. Their young don't weigh quite as much, so it seems like they don't feed them as well, but they end up producing more young per year in North Carolina. Whereas at the southwestern part of the range, they are doing much more poorly. So they're not reproducing very well. So it's kind of a classic thing where maybe there's conditions at the very north that are improving and conditions at the south that are getting worse.
So as we experience hotter and hotter climates, even though right now those birds are doing better in the north, as that starts to push more, what do you speculate might happen to those bird populations?
That's the big question. How fast are conditions going to, sort of that line from the south going to move north, where things become unsuitable? Is it going to move fast enough that it's going to catch up with all of them eventually, or are they going to be okay in the northern part of the range, that it's going to be slow enough that they can continue to do well there? But we're talking about very, very long time scales to see that.
Yeah. And do you think overall it still might catch up to the point where overall bird populations might be lower?
It's possible, but it's not clear, because it is possible to restore some of this pine habitat in areas farther north where it still exists. Because longleaf pine, 97% of it was lost because the Europeans came over and late 1800s, early 1900s, they just clear cut all of that pine forest. It was super important, the longleaf pine in the wooden ship era. They made turpentine out of the resin from the trees. They used the bowl of the tree to make masts, and so there was a lot of value, and they used it for various other things. So they cut over the forest. Not much of it was left, but it's potentially possible to bring longleaf back in some of these areas, so that are a bit farther north.
I was going to ask, is there anything that could be done in terms of like a conservation effort, like not make boats and turpentine, but have more habitat for these birds?
Yeah, I think that would be the thing, is to try to restore habitat north of where it is today. But there's a limit to that. I mean, you can't get much above the Virginia line. That's, if you look at the historic range, that's about as far as it went.
So overall, it's almost like a big unknown, right? It's changing. The birds are trying to adapt. They might not do it quickly enough. And it's a little bit just like we don't know.
Yeah, it is kind of scary, especially considering that we've been so successful at increasing their numbers that they were taken off the endangered species list in October.
Oh.
So they were downlisted to threatened. They've come that far back to have done all that work and to bring them all the way back and then have a new threat. Because the other thing, they're also experiencing what the vast majority of birds are experiencing, is trying to time their nesting correctly. Because the peak energy demands for basically any bird are when they are raising young. So for woodpeckers, it would be when they have nestlings in the nest. They have to feed them fast enough to grow to adult size in a matter of 3 weeks.
That sounds stressful.
They time their nesting to meet when their food that they need for the young is at its peak.
Yeah.
And in the temperate zone, insect populations, seeds, fruits, they're seasonal. And so birds have always used clues like the weather gets warmer, the buds on the trees start to come out, then the caterpillars start to come out. So they're basically, when they lay the eggs, they're predicting when that peak food supply is going to be available.
It's like, that's very cool to think about, that they're like just timing it perfectly.
And a lot of birds are not able to predict that as well. And some of that is because the whole sequence of things is disrupted by climate change. So the insects are not timing as well when the leaves on the trees are there that they can eat if it's a caterpillar as it used to. So, and the buds are maybe not coming out as exactly the same sequence of when the temperature get warmer. You get those spring warm temperatures, a warm spell, and they decide, things are going to start to happening. So there's a mismatch, and we think that's why the young do not weigh as much at a particular age as they did 30, 40 years ago. Yeah, and it's the fact that things are changing so rapidly. That's a problem when it's, the usual cycles of warmer and cooling over really long periods of time that happen so gradually that it's not hard to adjust. And you can imagine the phenology doesn't get out of sync, but when it's happening rapidly and the trees are responding one way and the insects are responding another way and the birds are responding another way, things can get out of sync pretty easily.
Yeah, because I guess we don't really think about how in sync everything is right now. We just kind of take it for granted. So,
yeah.
I mean, do you think that will affect, it will, if it's affecting birds in terms of the insect population, how do you think that might trickle out from there in terms of other populations too?
It can affect pollination. It can affect seed dispersal for different kinds of plants. That would be two of the main ways. It can also affect their impact on insects that we are concerned about, like mosquitoes and things like that. If their numbers are going down because of some of all this, that they wouldn't have the impact on mosquito populations or some other kinds of insects that they normally have had.
Yeah, I think I just heard of the first case of malaria contracted in New York, actually.
I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there was a paper in Science in 2019, and I work with a lot of these individuals about the fact that the number of birds in North America has declined by 3 billion in the last 50 years, and it's still declining. There was something called the State of the Birds report that was just released in 2025, March of this year, that shows again that these declines are continuing. And climate change is, there are many things, of course, that are responsible for that, but climate change is certainly one of them, we think.
So you think they'll keep declining as they have been?
Well, there's a lot of, if we didn't do anything, they certainly would. But there's a lot of work, especially by a group called Road to Recovery, that has identified, and the scientists that revealed all this are part of that group. They have identified species that are especially vulnerable. They're not endangered or anything yet, but their numbers are going down fast, and trying to figure out why that is, what's the leading causes of their decline, and address those things and try to level off their populations. And that group's having a lot of success, but usually there are general solutions that help, but then it seems like every species has their own particular version of a problem that so you have to, basically, you can't fix everything with one solution and affect that like 30 birds are going to be positively affected by this. You have to figure out a solution for everyone. So it takes a lot of resources.
It's great that those 30 species will be saved, but you can't, as you said, you can't save every single one on your own and prop them up. And
you have to do the investigations of every single species to really figure out what their problem is and fix it.
And that seems kind of impossible considering how many bird species there are. So the last question, which is the fun question, and I don't know if you're going to draw from your list when you were in 5th grade, but what is your favorite bird?
Yeah, that's hard for me. Because I've been fortunate enough to go all over the world studying birds and looking for birds, and so I've seen more than 5,000 different kinds of birds. So I have a lot of favorites, but thinking about this question, one that really stands out for me is not just because of how spectacular it is, but also the particular experience. It's the bluebird of paradise.
Oh, wow. You've seen it.
Yeah. So I was on a trip to New Guinea, and I was with a group of people, and we went by a kind of a souvenir shop, kind of roadside place, and the rest of the group wanted to look at souvenirs. But when I'm in a place like that, I am all about the birds. Like, I get in trouble at home because I never take pictures because I'm afraid I'm going to miss a bird if I take a picture. So I wandered off by myself, and there was a little town there, and I heard this thing, and I went over, and it was a bluebird of paradise at the edge of this field. And he had this display perch, and he hung upside down and just displayed. And I got to watch him for like a half an hour, the females coming in and him displaying. Yeah, it was just a kind of a surreal experience.
Yeah, because you've seen it in like nature documentaries, but in real life, it must be incredible.
Yeah, they're pretty loud and very beautiful.
It's gonna be a tough favorite bird to beat, especially if you've seen it. Well, thank you so much. This has been incredibly helpful. And I feel like there is hope. Maybe we can, save the birds. It's just, time will tell, I guess.
Yes, I just came back from the annual meeting of the American Ornithological Society last week, and the theme of that meeting was hope. And so a committee that I'm part of in the organization, we have this year and last year, we organized a symposium at the meeting called the Optimist Symposium. So it was success stories in the conservation of birds. So we had multiple speakers that had accomplished something, bringing something back, all kinds of varieties, but success stories showing, people that there is hope, that there are good things happening out there. It's not all gloom and doom.
We need hope. Otherwise, it's just too much.
We need help. And you'd be surprised how many people are actively working in just bird conservation, which is what I know about.
That's exciting. That makes me really happy, actually. All right. Well, thank you so, so much. And yeah, thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
It's been a pleasure.
After talking to Jeff, I realized that not just some, but all of the birds may be in a little bit of trouble. In order to get more insight, I spoke with Amanda Rodewalt, who's at Cornell and who hasn't only studied birds all over the world, but is part of a project called eBird, which is how regular birders, like you and I, can help collect data. All right, so just to get started, thank you so much for doing this, Amanda. Can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. It's great to be here. So my name is Amanda Rodewalt, and I am a professor at Cornell University and also the faculty director of the Center for Avian Population Studies at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology.
And how long have you been studying birds, and when did you kind of decide that you wanted to be an ornithologist?
Yeah, so it's been about probably 30 years now that I've been studying birds. If you count from, maybe actually like 35, if you count from toward the end of my undergraduate degree. So for me, it's interesting. Like, I actually still mostly identify as an ecologist because I care about birds and so many other parts of the environment. And I think for my background is a little bit different than many people who go into this field, because for me, I really mostly was attracted to it because I loved being outside. I loved nature. Yeah, I grew up in Schenectady, New York, and was more of a city kid playing in the alleys rather than being in just the most remarkable natural places in the world. And so I first went to University of Montana thinking, oh, I'll major in wildlife biology. I'll spend a lot of time outside with my work. And then I soon learned about birds. I saw there were a lot of opportunities in this area, and that birds are just amazing. They're beautiful, they're interesting. We can learn so much about our environment and how species interact by focusing on them. So that's kind of my path into the field.
So it's almost like you went out there and everything was interconnected, and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And birds are your favorite.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, looking at bird populations over time, I was reading something that was published about birds in the 1970s versus now. What has been happening?
Yeah, it's a bit of a sobering picture. So some of your listeners may have heard a few years ago we had some big papers coming out really showing that in North America we've lost 3 billion birds from breeding populations in North America since 1970. For me, that really hits home because I was born in 1970. Actually, so in my lifetime alone, we've lost almost one of every three breeding birds from North America. So that's pretty staggering. When we look across like the different groups of birds, ducks, warblers, flycatchers, whatever the group is, what we see is that declines are happening across all different taxonomic groups of birds. They're also happening across pretty much all habitats. Shorebirds and grassland birds have been declining the most. So we've lost, depending on sort of how you're tallying individuals or population trends, and we've lost about roughly half to 2/3 of all the individuals, with population trends still tracking like minus 43% since 1970. One of the things that we also notice is that, unlike I think how many of us would imagine population declines happening, where it's just mostly the rare or most sensitive species that we see declining. Today, what we're finding is that it's even common species. So species that can actually have once, persisted well with human activities in the same environments where we're living, they're declining. And I guess that's one thing I would just underscore too for your your listeners, is that we share the same environments as birds.
Mhm.
So if they're not healthy for birds, then that's really sending us a signal that they may not be so healthy for us either.
So we're seeing not only vulnerable birds, but all the birds disappearing. And some of your research, as you just said, focuses on how if the birds are not doing well, everyone else is probably not doing well either. But if none of the birds are doing well, does that mean that a lot of different environments are then possibly affected?
Right. So we're seeing that signal across all of the habitats. Now, I will say that there are, some habitats are and some groups of birds are doing comparably better than others. So, for example, ducks, and geese as a whole, not like every single species, but as a whole are actually doing much better and even increasing as a group, even though we see many different individual species still in declines. And why that's important, though, when we look at some of these successes like wetlands, and like national wildlife refuges, for example, those were actually established and invested in by hunters and fishers and different agencies over the years. So we know that we can actually reverse declines
Hmm.
if we put our minds to it and really invest in those areas.
So there are ways to kind of make it better, but overall, what would you say might happen if we have, say, increased global temperatures and increased incidence of severe weather events? How that would, hurt the birds?
Right. And so climate, so I think there are a few, maybe even like stepping back just briefly. If we look at all the factors that contribute to declines that we see in birds and other species in North America, we still find habitat loss, right, and habitat degradation are the most important. So, that's something I just want to emphasize too, and I'll talk about climate in a minute, but just to make sure that we all understand that those are choices we're still making today,
Mhm.
right? What were the activities that we're choosing to do, where we're choosing to place, different kinds of development or renewable energies, or, all of these ways that we're affecting environments. We have control over those, and those are what are affecting birds the most. So climate change is definitely a concern, right? Not to minimize that concern for humans and for all the other species that we share this planet with. But again, that can sometimes feel scarier if because we have it's a bit more of a of a complex problem to try to control. So with climate change, I guess there are some different ways that we're seeing effects on bird populations and populations of other species. So sometimes there are very direct effects, like direct climate related mortality. You mentioned intense storms, more extreme weather. So there we might start seeing and there have been reports sometimes where birds, especially migratory birds, right, that are traveling like, thousands of miles every year, it's possible they'll get caught over oceans, right, as they're migrating by big storms. And for some species, like there's a species that I've studied for a long time, cerulean warbler, this
Oh,
little bluebird that breeds
yeah.
in eastern forests, winters in northern South America. Well, when it migrates, it actually, all the populations of cerulean warbler funnel through one small area in Central America during like a 2 week period in the
Wow.
spring. Super intense. So you can imagine if we're having more storms or more intense storms, it's just more likely that we'll see a potentially catastrophic outcome for a species like that. So we do have those kinds of direct climate impacts, but most of the time, the effects of climate change are a lot more indirect, right? It can affect us through habitat loss and degradation, affecting food supply or the timing of resources. And it kind of hits birds from both sides. So, for example, with the salt marsh sparrow, this is a species that's losing its habitat. in the eastern US along the Atlantic seaboard because of sea level rise. So this species builds its nest in these salt marshes, and as the waters rise, literally the nestlings are drowning.
Oh my
On the
gosh.
other,
Oh,
yeah, on the other side of the spectrum, you have ducks, waterfowl populations in the prairie potholes of the central US. And so they're experiencing more and more droughts that make it difficult for them to survive and reproduce, right? So you kind of have, these different kinds of effects. In Hawaii, for example, there are many endemic species that are highly vulnerable to avian malaria, which is transmitted by mosquitoes that are introduced. Mosquitoes that transmit the disease where once they're really limited by temperature. And
mhm.
so what we see in the mountains is that a lot of the endemic birds, they could have these refuges, up high on top of the mountains. But as temperatures warm, we're seeing mosquitoes moving higher and higher up slope, and that's exposing them to diseases. So again, that's a climate related change too. So yeah, there are a lot of different ways that climate can affect birds and people.
So it's almost changing habitats faster than they can adapt, and then also avian malaria, which new fear unlocked for me,
Yeah,
because those are infiltrating everywhere. And as you
right.
mentioned, a lot of other things are also more immediate decisions. So how habitat is being used by humans. Is there anything that can be done right now, especially by just regular people too?
Would say like at the high level, right, being an engaged member of society, and affecting decisions that are made at high levels is important. Supporting organizations and agencies that are doing the hard work to protect environments, to protect species, is also really important, right? We can donate, we can help in that way. We can participate in science projects like eBird,
Yes.
right? Or the Breeding Bird Survey or the Christmas bird counts, right? These kinds of projects really allow us each to be the eyes and the ears for scientists and decision makers and managers out there. I mean, I really can't underscore how valuable every individual can be when we choose to share and submit observations of birds to these kinds of programs. If
Mhm.
we look at like the information, like we were just talking about at the start of this recording, right? What's happening with bird populations? All of that knowledge, we only have that because of the generosity of bird watchers who contribute that. I mean, really, you make a difference there. Yeah, I'm really excited. Yeah, and eBird is in the center, where I'm based at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So eBird is a global participatory science project. It's led by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, but I mean, fundamentally, it's a partnership of organizations and individuals around the world. I mean, really, we see eBird as a way that we're democratizing science for everyone because volunteers are submitting their bird observations and checklists to a central database that we manage at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, but those data are available to people and organizations and agencies freely for non-commercial uses. eBird was started in 2002, and its growth has been phenomenal. We're now past 2 billion observations that have been submitted by over 1 million contributors. Every country is represented, and
Wow.
it's used not only by birders. I mean, birders may be, accustomed to using it to see where, if they're really trying to find a certain species, it can be a great resource for that. It's used by bird guides to help even promote areas where they have expertise and where they've been birding. But it is truly a invaluable resource, but for scientists and for managers and decision makers. So we're working, for example, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, relies on eBird data to help augment other data sources and support their decision making, for example. So it is really an extraordinary program that's successful because of people's love of birds.
I love that. So anyone can go out and record birds that they just see, and that data is actually useful to scientists and in making decisions for making everyone happy, including the birds.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would encourage people to take a look at, like, online, if you were to just Google like eBird best practices, you can see some tips for making sure that the observations and checklists that you're submitting are as useful as they possibly can be. But it is definitely one way that people can help to be part of the solution. And one of the ways I really explain it too is, you can imagine, right? Like, I mean, we're all aware, we're like, gosh, there are so many different issues that we have to deal with now. So many crises. And if we're going to, we don't have the luxury, I guess one would say, to address one problem at a time. So what we need to do is start seeing, okay, where do solutions align and converge? Don't just need more conservation, we need smarter conservation, right? That means like making sure we're getting more bang for our buck. And so that requires a ton of information. We need to know where and when we need to apply any sort of conservation intervention, right? And to do that, to have that information, well, it's just not going to be possible if we're relying on professional biologists to collect that information. It's not at all. So that's where, resources like eBird are actually giving us just, a better lens than ever to understand the changes that are happening in our world. For people who are just starting with birding, I don't know if you're familiar with Merlin, but Merlin is a sort of companion app to eBird, that's also at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And Merlin is a great way to really start learning birds, right? And especially what is super popular now is the ability to identify bird song and calls, right, with your app. And that's transformative, right? So, I mean, it might have been the same way for you, but when I was out trying to learn songs, that was hard,
It's so
right?
hard.
I mean, it's like it was almost like inaccessible to try to find a bird. You'd hear one and try to go back to a CD or a tape cassette and like, where's that bird? And that didn't really work for me. So instead, you had to find other people and constantly be asking, what's that bird? What's that sound? What's that?
You have
And
that
now,
one friend that can do it, and you're like, how are you doing this?
exactly. So Merlin has really helped to build more knowledge and interest in birds. And hopefully a lot of the Merlin users will eventually decide, hey, I like this and I want to start contributing to eBird now too.
Yeah, and that's how I started using the Merlin app for the life list, so I could actually keep track of, even though in the beginning it was like pigeon, duck, pigeon. But after a while, I got to add very cool birds. And then you have this list of very cool birds that you've seen. And now I'm going to move over to eBird and actually add what I've seen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the last question, the fun question, what is your favorite bird?
Oh, that's a good one.
I
Yeah.
know it's tough.
Right. And it's funny, like, I don't really have a particular favorite bird of all times. I mean, the cerulean warbler is always going to be near and dear to my heart because I studied it for so long in coffee farms in Venezuela and Colombia and also on the breeding grounds. But I would say for me, it's more about like those moments where you kind of feel like you're seeing the secret world of a bird and connecting with it. So this summer I was in, British Columbia, at, where I spend a lot of time, my husband's out there, we have this bicontinental sort of relationship, and on the porch working on the deck, chestnut-backed chickadees and red-breasted nuthatches are probably my favorite at the moment, just seeing them come in for bird seed and look at us, and the chickadees would land on the on our computers or
Oh,
at
wow.
the desk saying like, would you please put out more sunflower seeds? So it is just those kinds of ways of just connecting with birds
Yeah.
that really are moving and fun for me.
It sounds magical, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
they're just like, hi.
What
Um,
is your favorite bird, if I could ask?
so probably my spark bird, which is not, it's a very common bird. It's a great egret. I was running in Central Park and it started flying next to me and I was like, oh man, like birds are super cool.
Yeah.
I was like, oh wow. Like it's like this whole other world that is like right there and you don't notice it half the time. And then I had one friend who was really into birding and I'm like, all right, show me your ways.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for doing this. Really excited. Really hope we can keep the birds safe. So everybody go get on Merlin and get on eBird.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
If all of this talk about birding has got you excited about birding, or if you've been thinking about starting your own club, I spoke with Michael Lombardo here in Brooklyn, who started the McGolrick Bird Club. If you're interested in starting your own club, or if you've been thinking about joining a club right here in New York City, stay tuned. Hi, and welcome to Gotta Save My Favorite Things. This is the birding episode, and I'm here with Michael. Can you just introduce yourself briefly to our viewers?
Yeah, my name is Michael Lombardo. I am the creator and host of McGolrick Bird Club, which is a weekly outing in North Brooklyn where neighbors gather, walk around this park, and look for birds.
And how did that kind of come about? Like, how did you start that club?
There were a confluence of things that led to my creating this group. One was I became a dad, and that meant that as a birder, I could not justify these big trips to faraway hotspots. So I couldn't do like an hour and a half on the subway, walking around Prospect Park for 2 hours, and then coming back. We lived down the street, so I just started looping this park, our local park. And I started seeing a surprising number of uncommon birds that even birders in Prospect Park would get excited for.
Are your kids going to be birders? Are they birders now?
Right. So my 3-year-old daughter can identify like blue jays by ear. So I am doing a Tiger Woods dad sort of like training where I'm like, what was that? What does the blue jay say? So I'm definitely like hitting on that. Oh, there's a bumblebee just like.
It's just
so
like hanging
sweet.
out. It's like, hello, what is this?
Hi,
What are you
what's up? It's so nice to see these bees in the park. So I am going to come on very strong. I'm fully expecting them to rebel against it at some point, and then maybe like after college come back to it.
Yeah, because it's not cool if dad likes it, but later in life you're
No.
like, dad was right.
100%. I'm definitely banking on that trajectory, but birdwatching has become such an important practice of my own life. It's changed the way that I see the world, and I will be like very happy to try to impart that on my own daughters. The second thing is I had been to bird outings in New York and elsewhere. And even if they were like a little bit more targeted to young people, they seem to typically attract established or already avid birders. And for me, when there was like one new person who was curious among that group, they always seemed a little confused or overwhelmed. And even if they were introductory bird walks, it just felt like if I were trying to hold their hand and bring them into this, and the way that I experienced it as like a non-naturalist city person who 6 years ago unexpectedly got into bird watching versus like a biology student or a STEM-y type person who's like already a little bit more naturally inclined to get into bird watching.
And as someone who is in a STEM field, I still found it pretty hard to get into.
Yeah.
Because you would go to these bird groups and it's like, unless you were already into it or had been doing it for years, they're kind of like, what are you doing here?
Yes.
And it took a couple years of just going anyway. So it's nice that you're there to greet the newbies.
Yeah, showing up to outings, events, clubs is nerve-wracking. It takes a lot of courage. And bird watchers like stereotypical bird watchers have a reputation for being kind of standoffish or cliquey. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's this correlation with, no offense to STEMmy life sciences people, but like they're not necessarily the most open, socially friendly. So it's like people think birders are rude or that they're being talked down to, but a lot of these folks historically are just a little more asocial.
Yeah, a lot of STEMmy people are just socially a little awkward.
Yeah.
as one of them, I get to say that.
It's radiating off of you. We're barely making it through this I'm just joking. But I think it can conflict with that very like focused, intense, deep knowledge acquiring type of mind.
Yeah.
That can be on the opposite side of the spectrum, which is like open, warm, not focused, not specific, not detailed. I don't know. I haven't figured it quite out.
Well, especially if you come in and someone knows like a rare bird name and you're like, I have no idea what that is. And now I feel like I don't know anything.
Absolutely.
So it's good to have someone there to help you through that.
Yeah.
And how have people kind of responded to it?
So we get on average 85 people every Saturday. 20% of those are folks who've never showed up before. So I guess they've responded in kind of a way that I expected, which is they show up, they're maybe a little dubious. We start to walk around the park. We see a bird that is not a pigeon or some species that they've never bothered to notice before. And very quickly something switches where they're like, whoa, it could be a common grackle or an American robin, not particularly uncommon birds, but unless you are dedicated to being aware of your surroundings, you won't notice these birds. But when you do and you see them and they're beautiful and they're very easy to see, something lights up for almost everyone. So that's been a part of the reaction. I think another part of the reaction is, and this was unintentional on my part, but it's become a sort of third space, a reliable place where people can find community and friends, a welcoming environment, good vibes. And so people have become friends. They've like made out with one another, like
At the park.
Not yet. Not yet. Okay. Or at least I haven't seen it. There are some secluded corners. Do whatever you want. So those have been some reactions, and yeah, I think there has been something I'm grateful for, which is just people are grateful to have been exposed to birding, and the way I feel grateful that I've discovered this way of just becoming a little bit more sensitive to my surroundings and like in tune with the natural world.
It's almost like another world opening up that was right in front of you that you didn't even know existed.
Yes.
And it's no, that's amazing. So is that your favorite part of introducing this to people, or?
Yeah, that's my favorite part.
Yeah,
it was such a like before and after experience in my own life where when I look back to my life, this was in 2019 when I first discovered birds, but when I think about the time before, I'm sad for that person because there was this layer of experience that I was missing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I did a lot of traveling. I prioritized that in my early 30s. And like, what was I doing? I was certainly like drinking a lot. Like that was a layer of life that I was experiencing.
There could have been so many birds out there.
There were.
Oh, no.
There were so many.
Oh, no.
I'm gonna have to go back to a lot of places. But yeah, showing people that, like, helping them tune in is an amazing experience and makes me happy. I think the other part is a natural extension of that, and something I talk a lot about at these outings is if you look around the world, everyone, like 90% of people strolling around the park, I would say it's higher for drivers, like 99% of drivers are looking at their phones. And we're all addicted to our phones. The outcomes of that have been bad, whether it's on a personal level when you doom scroll mindlessly for an hour and you don't realize what happened and you feel shitty.
Yeah.
Or you look at like our politics, our culture, what it's sort of become. So that bird watching for me was always the opposite of that, and my way of like resisting that world as best I can, even though I'm addicted too, but like talking to people about that, thinking about it, and then sort of being a small, perhaps indirect, but nonetheless real wedge against phone addiction is also something that makes me really happy.
And if you're out looking for birds, you can't look at your phone. So
No.
it's a pretty safe way to... So you always get that notification every week and you see how many hours a day you're on your phone and you're like, if it could just bring it down a little,
Yeah.
that would just go birding instead. How does the following statement make you feel? Birding may not be around forever.
It's very depressing. I'm very depressed about it. I'm kind of energized by it too. Part of this effort, it's not explicit, but sort of like a third wave effect that I imagine it can have on people, where I don't talk about declining bird populations. I don't talk about climate change per se. I mean, occasionally it will come up naturally and we'll riff about it, but I always start with this wedge of like fun, vibey, quasi like bird spirituality.
Yeah.
And then I want people to get hooked. And then once they're hooked, they will very naturally start to learn about the depressing statistics.
Yes.
About the importance of like habitat preservation. Those things will come, is my sense. So I'm energized to like push people in that direction. I'm also, you know, like there's a sliver of hope where I'm like, you know what? We've swung very far in one direction. Industrialization, overdevelopment, like ignoring the secondary effects of like big businesses and polluters, and like there's a growing consciousness around it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know enough to say whether we're actually doomed or not. I'm not like following the data
I don't think
closely.
anyone actually knows exactly. It's all models. So that is, we follow the models, but
yeah, there's a layer of sadness and hopelessness, and then there's a part of me that's like, the best that I can do is try to make the changes that I can in my world.
yeah.
And if that's this park and bringing more people towards birding, then I'm motivated to do that.
It's almost like bird church. Now you're in bird church, you want to save the birds.
100%.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question. Are you ready?
Yeah.
What is your favorite bird?
So when you ask birders this, they will usually tell you their spark bird,
Yeah.
which is like the one that turned it on.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true. So my favorite bird is in 2019, when I finally decided to try bird watching, I was very dubious. And I was like, I'm already sort of the weird guy in my friend group. Am I really going to like give bird watching a
Let's
chance
add birding
and just
to
cement
this.
that? Yeah. I walked out of my apartment. I was in San Francisco, and it was 45 seconds or so when I heard an unfamiliar sound. It had probably been around me all the time. I just had not paid attention, but it was a loud cheep sound, and I stopped and I waited underneath the palm tree. There was a row of palm trees near
San
my
Francisco.
apartment.
Yes.
And a bright orange, yellow, and black bird popped out and landed on a palm frond. It turned out to be a hooded oriole.
Oh, wow.
I had lived in California my entire life at that time, so I had had 35 years to notice this bird because they're there every spring and summer, but I'd never seen it. Beyond that, I didn't know that orioles or any type of oriole lived in California.
Yeah.
They're like in Baja, but because we've planted palm trees, they come up because they nest in palm trees.
Cool.
Anyway, vividly beautiful there, but like unseen. The experience is so salient. It's like any life milestone. It's like, you know, the first time I landed a kickflip on my skateboard, or like my first kiss, or like, it's just such a tentpole moment. The hooded oriole will always be like if I was gonna get a tattoo, it'd probably be a hooded oriole.
You should get a tattoo. Do you want to tell people about your club? If you happen to live in New York, you can come by.
Sure, yeah. So every Saturday in North Brooklyn, specifically Greenpoint, we meet at McGolrick Park. It's a small park just a few blocks down from McCarran, which is the park that most folks know. We meet at the southwest corner, which is right across from Variety Coffee at 9 a.m. So that's every Saturday. I'm also, unfortunately, because it's a necessary evil, I'm online. So we have like an Instagram page at McG Bird Club for McGorrick Bird Club. And I write a Substack where I'll do like time relevant bird lessons. And those birds are New York City specific, but New York City's bioregion is shared with most of the eastern US, east of the Rockies. So like if you live anywhere in that area, I can teach you about some of the birds that you can expect to see. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And thank you
Thanks
for joining us.
having me. Yeah.
Yeah, this
Bye,
is great.
everybody.
Come bird. Thank you so much for joining me on Gotta Save My Favorite Things. I hope we save birding. I would be super, super, super sad if we didn't. I don't know what I would do with my binocs. Hope to see you next time. Just trying to save my favorite things.